Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Network Effect. I'm Amy Henderson, VP of Client Relations at Channelnomics, and thanks for tuning in. Each episode, we sit down with leaders who are reshaping how partnerships drive real revenue, and today's conversation tackles one of the biggest shifts happening across the channel right now: the move from transactional product sales to complex, reoccurring subscription ecosystems. Today, I'm joined by Scott Frew, CEO, and Nick Verykios, Chief Strategy Officer at Iasset. Iasset is helping distributors, vendors, and service providers turn subscription complexity into profitable growth, bringing clarity to renewals, lifecycle management, and partner performance in a world where recurring revenue is everything. Today, we're diving into how lifecycle intelligence, lifecycle visibility, and channel data are becoming the new foundation of partner profitability. So let's welcome Scott and Nick to the show. And what we're talking about today is the big shift from transactions to lifecycle revenue, right? How lifecycle intelligence is redefining channel profitability. But before I get into that, for our audience who may not know ISED or what you're about and how you help organizations through this big shift, would one of you like to take on just giving a quick introduction?
Sure, let me take it. Iasset was spun out of one of the fastest growing distributors in APAC, Distribution Central. The objective of the platform was to take out the drudgery of quoting and the getting things happening at a higher frequency across a global channel. So we run vendors, distributors, and resellers for all of the revenue operations. From a strategy context, which is a little bit different to the vendors layer protocol, we run LIPS, which is land, invest, protect, and surrender, which every one of those companies needs to deal with, which is net new, expand and extend, and renewals and end of life. So that platform was built to aid those customers, and we take our customers from sort of 1 to 2 week quote cycles down to seconds.
Wow, it's amazing. Nick, anything to add from your side?
Yeah, the focus is on the execution of a strategy. So we execute a strategy that which Scott mentioned, land, invest, protect, surrender. It's a business model, and it's a modern business model based on the whole channel ecosystem and the way it operates now. So one thing to have a strategy, we execute on that strategy. And it's been happening actually for 15 years, not just one or two. So, we call ourselves the oldest startup in the world.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's fantastic. Well, let's get into it, right? When you think about the big shift from transactions to life cycle revenue. So let's start with the macro, right? The channel has clearly shifted from one-time transactions to ongoing subscriptions, but operationally, many partners are still catching up. Scott, I'd love to start with you. From your perspective, what's fundamentally broken and how the channel manages reoccurring revenue today?
I think the bit that's broken is people assume that they can throw legacy applications or even Excel at a revenue operations process. And we have moved on, they were using Excel nearly 40 years ago to do this. And they haven't really moved on from that point. Then we brought out CPQ or quote tools, which, all of the usual suspects, and no one ever got fired for buying them because they're big names. But actually, it doesn't make anyone more efficient. It's still a rep sitting there fundamentally dealing with a quote screen, and it assumes that every deal needs to be manually handled. And as we were saying before in the previous podcast, my objective for our customers is to get to roughly a 65% automated quote load, so their salespeople get on with the job of selling rather than sitting there in front of a screen being data entry clerks. And it doesn't matter, the 35% left over is net new or exception management. The rest of it, whether it's renewal, expand, extend, end of life, whatever it is, can be done by process and data points, and really where if you look at the average reseller, they don't have an install base. There's lots of people that don't have it. When I talk about an install base, that means that inside your system, the vendor connects you to the distributor that sold it, to the partner that sold it, to the end user, to the site, to the serial numbers, to the contracts or subscription or consumption, all in that clean database. Then you can let platforms such as ours run, the most basic processes, which you don't need a sales rep in front of. Or if you want to send it off for just a check because it's over $50,000 or whatever, you can still put a human in the middle. But we're well beyond that. And I think that most of the IT industry is very focused on technology innovation at the front end, like what's my latest product, what's my latest offering, AI or whatever. But they don't actually focus on that operational efficiency at the back end.
That's really great insight and feedback as well. Nick, how about you from the go-to-market side? Where are you seeing partners struggle the most? Is it visibility? Is it data, incentives, or is there something else that we're not even thinking about?
Well, it's definitely getting visibility and insight into the revenue opportunities, and they could be dormant or they could be otherwise. Just your standard opportunities. But in particular in their existing customer base. So navigating how to get there and uncovering those dormant opportunities, that's the big one. But they're relying on vendors and distributors to do that more so than themselves, of which they have the same problem. They have the visibility. So everyone's in the dark, and that's what we're hearing the most and where we can help the most.
Gotcha. Well, let's think of it in terms of the renewal gap equaling, the revenue gap. We talked about on your podcast the revenue gap or the revenue attrition, if you will. One theme that we keep hearing is that renewals are the new battleground for margin. So, Nick, maybe if I kick it back to you, why, from your perspective, why are so many organizations still leaving renewal revenue on the table?
That's the golden question. There are two drivers. The first thing anyone has to understand is, I'll actually answer it with a question. It's, who owns the renewal? Well, the answer is whoever knows about it. All right. And once you've got an understanding of that, then you know what the big problem is. You might not know about it, or everyone knows about it, and that talks about the profitability of the renewal as well, even if you know about it. But all our data is telling us, and this is the second point, the best predictor of a renewal and therefore a reduction in the renewal gap is what you do before the renewal. So what kind of using the same data that you have, what kind of activity are you going to engage in proactively with your customer on upselling, cross-selling, that kind of activity, which is also dormant revenue because it sits there because every vendor wants their channel, and particularly the partner that has a transactional relationship with the end customer to go and close that, upselling on subscriptions, upselling on new features, cross-selling with a reference architecture that actually gives partners co-opetition opportunities. That's where unsolicited proposals in what we call expand and extend strategies make sense, because you're back into a consultative sell. And if you're doing that, it's not just the revenue gap that you're solving, it's the margin gap. All right, because it becomes less contested. And that first contact, is so important prior to any renewal, because what you've also got to do with a renewal is be way ahead of that chaos that comes with in-quarter renewals, so that you can help your customer budget for the renewal, rather than give them a shock and say, "What? I wasn't expecting that. I didn't even budget for it." So if you've done that, you can own it. All right,
Yeah.
and you're not losing that. So there's activity rather than you automate the requirement to do the activity. You can even automate some of that activity using the right platform, and then you stay in that game, and that reduces churn significantly, dictated by what your renewal rates are.
Well, and that dovetails so well into Scott, a question that I had for you in terms of, either from a platform perspective or a consultative perspective, how does Iasset rethink renewals, not just as an operational task, but as a strategic growth lever?
So the short answer is, let me go back to Nick's comment. My favorite saying by a CEO of one of our customers in North America is every renewal's a knife fight. We need to get in with our knife, cut it all up and get out before all the other knives arrive. So speed is an issue. And one of Nick's favorite sayings is renew when all else fails. So you're going in, you're always in there, seeing the customer expand, extend, whatever. What Iasset does is back to that install base point. If you've got clean install base, all the other actions, all the other quoting actions are a function of that install base. So forgetting net new for a minute, renew, expand, extend, surrender, all come from that data set. And it gives whoever the user is the power to engage with their customers a lot better and automate all of those processes around it. So let's talk about renewals. Any one of our customers can generate 100% of their renewal quotes straight out of the platform. And our advocacy is always to run at 100 days as the initial contact because most of their competitors are running at 90. So it gets you in a little bit earlier, trying to close it out. Some of our customers run all of their renewals for, let's say, June, go out on the 1st of June. So they send out the entire month stack. So now they'll get some of the renewals back without any selling, if you like, but the rest they can do with an exception analysis rather than sending them out in bits and pieces. And the last part, which the smarter customers are using, is what we call sweep the estate. So you've got a renewal activity coming up, and let's say you're dealing with Department of Defense or someone who's a large government entity. I'll tell you one thing they hate. They hate lots of little renewals all year because it makes budgeting difficult. They've got to get approvals for it all. So when there's a trigger point like a renew, an upgrade, expand, end of life, whatever it is, the rep can hit sweep the estate. And they can drag all of the renewals, let's say for the next 90 days, or we can do it automatically into that one quote, co-term the lot, multi-vendor, send it out the door. So two things happen. One, the end customer has less quotes and approvals and payments to deal with. But two, the rep is happy because their, let's say, $50,000 quote's gone to a $250,000 quote, for argument's sake. So again, you can't do that with an Excel spreadsheet or an old-fashioned CPQ or whatever. You need the install base. And that, as you see AI branch out, and I mentioned on the previous podcast, if you don't have that foundation and it's got to be clean, and the only way to keep data clean is connected to all the silos, you can't run AI over it either. So that's where the critical piece sits.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you think about the predictability of the revenue and budget predictability, I want to say, it all has to do with, the life cycle intelligence, right? Life cycle transactions, right? You've both talked about life cycle intelligence as a core differentiator. So Scott, maybe while you have the floor, how would you define life cycle intelligence, and why is it different from traditional channel data or reporting?
So, I mean, from my point of view, there is no tradition. We're the only guys playing in this install-based data or in the IT channel. So there is channel data is typically PRM data, maybe propensity type data, to use Larry's term, the fluffy stuff that happens. Ours is this deep RevOps that's running across a vendor through a distributor out to a reseller and ultimately to an end customer. So that is the foundational piece. And if you have that, then you can run intelligence. To give an example, Ingrid, which is our AI, of course, all AIs have female names for whatever reason, but ours is Ingrid. She can find white space opportunities in that data set that you may not be able to report on. So I always say, AI finds the revenue that's between the reporting lines. So find me all the white space for a particular vendor. I won't mention vendor names, but she will come up with literally 20 opportunities that the rep may have not thought about because there's so much data to actually try and pull a white space sort of evaluation out would take man hours rather than AI is pulling it apart in seconds. And the intelligence is the foundational data. The decision making and the analysis are sitting in that AI stack. Or, I mean, you can still do it with machine learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to, increasing that level of visibility, Nick, I'll pose this question to you. How does that translate into real outcomes for customers? What do you see that actually changes once they have this level of visibility available to them?
Yeah, I'll answer that. There are two really important ones that come to mind, but we have to first understand that any outcome that we're talking about in this context first and foremost, that has to be data driven. Otherwise, you won't be able to get that visibility. You won't be able to get that predictive work that's coming your way. You won't be able to turn that white space into outcomes. And a key part of those outcomes is making sure that you understand that, you don't believe the idea that you have bad data. You do have good data. It was just collected for a different purpose, and that was to make a sale, ERP, whatever. Repurposing that data by using a platform that allows it to be repurposed and used for something to get you an outcome is really important. It takes 365 days to clean all, or 366 days to clean all that, a year and a day, because you've gone through a cycle, and that cycle is the renewal. But that renewal informs everything else that you could possibly do. So from that, the most common outcomes, number one, what I call the foundational outcome is to eliminate churn. In other words, no one's playing with your customer except you, because you're so far ahead of it. And you're predicting that outcome through work that you do. Scott quoted me before. It's what I say is, if at first you don't succeed, renew. So if at first you don't succeed with everything you have to do, then at least you'll get the renewal because you're working towards it. You might not get the upsell or the cross-sell, but you will get the renewal because you're in there. But most important for me is the other fundamental outcome, and that is you're providing using that data and this is a big outcome, providing relevant, unsolicited proposals to your customer. What I mean by that is their data turns into your ability to take a quote to a customer and say, you should be buying this because you've bought that. And that brings you back into a consultative selling approach. And that's just gold for anyone who's starting to do that and work with that. They're invaluable, not just because sales teams become proactive, but the automation to do the ones where you don't want a human touch becomes just as valuable and provides the same outcome. And that is something that your customer otherwise would not have done if it wasn't for you, and is valuable to them because you've used their data.
Yeah. And, we talked about earlier on, I believe, your podcast, where, the less dependent that a partner is, the more self-sufficient they become, the more valuable they are to that vendor. But the vendor has to get the partner to get to that point. And that's all about the data and teaching them and being that consultative arm. And it sounds like that you guys have the capability to do that. And I would like to just lean in more to Iasset's differentiation in the market. Look, there's a lot of tools out there, lots of tools touching parts of the subscription life cycle, right? You've got your partner relationship management systems, your PRMs, you've got billing platforms, you've got CRMs, right? And I think, Nick, you mentioned this earlier, no one, is getting fired from buying these, high name brand technologies out there. But when you think about Iasset's platform, where do you uniquely fit, and what gaps you're solving for that others aren't?
So I'll take that, Nick. Think about, let's start with the vendor. The vendor's got an ERP system, a CRM system, maybe a support desk, ITSM, and maybe license enablement. There's a few systems that exist in vendors depending on the type of vendor it is. So the first part that we do differently is we sit in the middle of all of those and we API into all of them, so that we are starting to not create, we do create by default a single source of truth, but that's not the pitch. The pitch is you need all these single sources of truth sitting in the organization doing what they do, but we bring it all together and cleanse as we go. The biggest differentiator between Iasset and potentially anything else that's sitting in doing this sort of work is then if you're running an Iasset in a distributor, unless a Nirvana is an Iasset inside a reseller, well, those three Iassets engage with each other. And again, you're taking this concept of clean data across a channel so that all of them are in sync. So if the vendor makes a change to a install base record, it appears in the distributor and the reseller system. Vice versa, if the reseller changes a serial number out because the box has failed or they've changed the contracts, it'll feed back up into that system. And this fundamentally, the install base piece and the ability to connect to anything across global ecosystems changes the game. So, any vendor listening to this, if it takes you more than, let's say, 3 or 4 days, 2 weeks, whatever it is, to get a quote all the way down to that end customer, I would say to you, we have customers now that it's a 12-second turnaround from a lifecycle quote created by a platform somewhere in the channel to going all the way up to the vendor, getting the pricing, checking the serial number, checking all the entity information, coming all the way back down and presenting a quote to a customer. And 12 seconds, if you're a vendor that you're trying to win churn over the rest of the market, if you're at 2 weeks and your competitors are at 12 seconds, it's a no-brainer for a channel, because the reseller, or the partner, I should say, can get on and sell with more because they're not worried about how long it takes to get a quote out the door.
That sounds like the aha moment when you're talking to a vendor about why they should work with Iasset. It's, hey, no one wants to wait. We talked about this on your podcast. No one wants to wait 2 weeks for a quote, especially when a competitor can produce it in 12 seconds. That's a huge value add, right? And I think a huge why. When you think about what is the why, or what is the aha moment, that's it. Well, let's get tactical here when we think about deep diving into features and what's new. What are some key capabilities or innovations you're most excited about right now? Nick, how about I start with you?
I think just to conclude on what Scott was saying, I think that aha moment was with the platform was actually invented in the distribution world, where we invented it because there was nothing there. And what we were trying to do is get our salespeople to go and do more than just take, so the sales strategy moves. I think that's what they see the most. What's our custom? The big ahas. They see their sales motion moving from order take, which is a singular transaction each time, to what we call order make, and that is lifetime recurring customer value, being able to go back to, in this case, their resellers. So distributors going back to their resellers and giving them constant reasons to go talk to their customers rather than just have a cup of coffee. And the innovation that's related to that, so this follows on quite well. By far, it's what Scott was talking about, which is bringing the whole channel together through an automated piece from, I dare say, soup to nuts. From the minute the vendor starts doing something to the minute a customer buys something, it's all informed, it's all the same data, it's all accurate, it's all quick, but there's a sales motion that's proactive. In other words, everyone is giving the next level in that channel through that innovation, something that they can't do without, number one. They didn't know about it, number two, and have to have it. And number three, they think they can only get it from you because you're doing it. And that takes away that whole idea of revenue crushing and margin and margin deterioration, which is the number one screen point for the channel. If no one's making money except the vendor, well, start making money by being proactive and use the tools or the innovations that are available. But having said that, anything in the channel right now that's innovative, there is a roadblock from internals because they don't want to move away from anything they're doing. We spoke about that in our podcast, and that is because they don't have a number. I think everyone should have a number. Everyone. If you work in the channel, you should have a number because you're responsible for it. You're responsible for this innovation coming through to change the goalposts. Excuse me.
Well, it sounds like that you're creating the best demand that can be created, which is creating demand that people didn't know was there already. Kind of like how, Steve Jobs invented the iPhone. He created this demand because it became, wow, we didn't know we need this. Now we have to have it. We can't live without it. And it sounds like that you're on that.
I think we just shone a spotlight. The data exists, the opportunities exist. People are just handling it badly. We're not in the class of Steve Jobs, but we've just shone a spotlight on the challenges that the IT channel has. And you asked about features earlier. I've got a whole bunch of favorite features, obviously. But being able to individually, on a global context, find a product or a service or a customer, whatever it is, and be able to generate, let's say, 250,000 quotes across a global channel in 25 languages, upselling them on the next module or asset or whatever it is that needs to go with that across, the world, that's a game changer. Like right now, if you pick any vendor and you say, I want to find all the people that have bought product X and I want to sell them product Y, well, they do a broadcast marketing campaign and you're lucky to get some sort of traction. We can individually hit the end user, the reseller, or the distributor, all three at once with different messaging, and no one else on the planet can do that. So that's one of the features. The other thing is, if you're a partner listening to this, my partner's biggest grudges were with, let's say, antivirus. Antivirus products are $200. Let's say you get 6 points margin on $200. If I had a sales rep pick up a phone to chase a 6-point deal on $200, I've wasted money. I've gone backwards because those reps are expensive resource. So how do I take all of that off them and only allow them to deal with the over $50,000 and everything else is just automation? You can still have exception management with inside sales teams or offshoring teams, but at the end of the day, you are trying to make it as easy as possible to get the order through the door and all the way out the channel at the lowest cost for all parties involved.
Yeah, exactly. You really want to know what that cost of revenue is when you think about the opportunity cost, right? The cost to do that transaction and to automate it as quickly as possible. Um, and I think it's all about data, right? When you think about data to action, turning insight into revenue, a lot of companies have the data, but they don't operationalize it, right? So from your perspective, and either of you, feel free to take this, but how does Iasset move customers from insight from the data to action to actual revenue impact?
Well, if you think about, we hear data is the new oil. All right. Well, oil's useless unless it's refined. All right. So data's useless unless it's refined. You got to do something with it. So you create something with it. So the Iasset platform takes that data, even when you just ask it to do something, and it'll do it for your customer base with all that data, and again inform them of opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have known. All right. And that level of innovation, and you can add all kinds of things like artificial intelligence and that, but predominantly it's machine learning that actually grabs your data. It's already there and it tells you what to do, and it gives you an opportunity to sit in front of a customer and have a meaningful conversation about what's valuable to them. And you already know because you have their data on what they've already bought and what they need to do, as I was talking about before. There is nothing more exciting than seeing a customer being delighted when they know they can do that now, whereas they just couldn't before.
And I just, sorry to interrupt. I just got back from Europe, and one of our newest customers up in Europe, their time to value was less than 30 days, and they got a 15-to-1 straight out of the bat. And that's not refreshed refreshed install base, because that's a process. That is just making the reps 15-to-1 times more efficient doing their quoting processes, because we've got the APIs into the vendor set to make it easier for them to get a quote out the door. And I mean, they are absolutely ecstatic.
Yeah, I mean, that is a wonderful example and pattern where visibility directly leads to, those better outcomes, right? And things that they can point back to actual data and math to, right? Well, let's from an ICP and ideal customer profile standpoint, let's talk about fit. Who gets the most value from Iasset, in terms of distributors, vendors, subscription heavy orgs, where's that niche fit, and maybe at what stage of maturity? Is this for companies trying to fix chaos or to optimize at scale? What would you guys think about that?
I think from my point of view, the ICP exists in all three layers, but they've got slightly different issues, and the platform responds slightly differently based on where they sit in the food chain. So if you look at early stage vendors, and quite often we present to PE companies that are acquiring early stage vendors, the first thing you want to do is start collecting install base from day one, which, a lot of vendors don't. They're further on down the track before they even deal with that. If you look at a hardware vendor, it's usually about a classic renewals, upgrades, end of life. If it's a subscription vendor, a lot of the subscription vendors will put on a subscription tool, but those tools are built for direct business. They're not built for subscription or consumption to go through a distributor and then a reseller and out the door. So we've got lots of features on consumption, billing as well as compliance. So, someone's been using 1,000 a month and suddenly they drop to 200 a month. Well, that's an alert, right? In a distributor context, it's probably the easiest or the lowest hanging fruit of the lot, because distributors are operating on super, super thin margins. They're trying to add as much value as they possibly can, and they are usually open to automation. And you've seen some, like Ingram tell everyone they're a platform company. That's the sort of thing that all distributors should actually be in that context. So distributors, automation's a big thing, super thin margins. You want to cover it across, let's say, 200 vendors. That's a fundamentally difficult thing to solve. In a reseller context, the resellers that have moved forward, so the early adopters, because remember, most resellers are just opportunistic in their approach to the customer. Here's a quote, get an order. Here's a quote, get an order. These ones are actually now presenting the customer's install base back to them as a value of the transaction. So yes, we're punching out net new quotes, or we're putting out renewals or expand or whatever in an automated fashion, but actually, here you go, customer. Here's everything you've bought from us. We'll manage that for you. You won't miss an opportunity. We plug into security systems so that if a renewal is coming up to, let's say, 30 days to go, it's alerting everybody. Because if you have a file or a security product run out of maintenance, it's a cyber threat, right? So there's all sorts of different ways that our ICP works. And an ICP vendor is a different conversation to an ICP distributor versus an ICP partner. And sorry, I keep saying reseller. I know we've probably got a lot of American audience, but a reseller's a partner.
It's universal language. We all get it. It's the channel. So, as we're kind of winding down on time, I would love to ask you guys both a question, and two-part question, if you will. First being, what are the biggest misconceptions you're seeing in the market right now about managing subscriptions or channel revenue? And secondly, as we look ahead, what trends are going to matter most for channel leaders over the next 12 to 24 months, in terms of what you guys are seeing?
Well, okay. I can tell you that the biggest ingrained problem is I dare say a naivety that because you sold the initial technology to a customer, all right, you'll get everything after that without realizing that it's contested and not doing anything about it and waiting for, say, for example, a vendor to give you the information. That has to go. That has to go. And on top of that, what that means is that if you're waiting for your vendor to give you a program to execute on, all right, like let's say it's a end of life, which is, a very important, channel role. If you don't know where all your customers are, and if you don't know what you've sold them or what needs to be replaced, because, we went through an end of life revolution with a lot of on-premises equipment going into cloud, right? So you had to turn that into transactions. The amount of transactions were too many, couldn't do it. But they thought that they could because they sold the initial technology. That has to go away. That's a really, really, really big, important one. And for channel leaders, the second part of your question, they can't ignore reshaping that linear channel into a true transactional ecosystem and need a platform to do it. They just can't ignore it now. And the ones that are doing it are winning. They're already winning. We're seeing it. We're seeing it with a lot of our customers because they understand that it's no longer vendor to distributor to reseller to end customer. It could go sideways for consultative services. It could, and there's 3 or 4, if you talk to guys like Jay McBain, the 20-something moving parts that are going on, before a sale gets made. Some way you have to democratize that. And you have to democratize that at the lowest level, which is the CPQ, all right, that talks to everything and everyone and understands that there is a life cycle approach waiting, and then let that life cycle approach the automation work. When a channel champion or a channel leader does that, they win every single time. We haven't seen one lose yet. Scott, what do you think?
Well, from a futuristic point of view, I think as we, in a global context, as we see the UK swelter under record temperatures and climate change is coming hard at us, whether countries are reacting fast enough or not, I think from a futuristic point of view, the carbon output of the products and the carbon burning to build the products is going to be more and more critical, which again is another data silo and install base and certificates that you can hand down to your customer to give you more value. I think there's an opportunity for an ITAD player. We have been talking to one in North America where, how much am I going to get back for the kit that I'm going to return for the new kit that's coming in? You've got, the AI chip issue that we're running through now. So people are sweating equipment longer. So what does that mean in terms of revenue? I need to make sure my renewal revenue's rock solid because I'm not getting net new sales because they can't afford the upgrade in some of these chipsets. There's a lot of issues coming at us as a global, the world that the channel needs to deal with, and some, like always, some will move faster than others.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's great insight, great perspective. When you think about the common misconceptions, right? Just because you built it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to come in terms of, just because you sold the renewal doesn't mean they're automatically come back. You really need to work that. You need to earn that renewal. And when you think about the carbon footprint of the technologies out there, I mean, just the amount of data centers that are throwing up every single day just to sustain the amount of AI data and keeping that, keeping up with all of the technology out there. And when you think about renewal, hardware, right? You buy a new Pelican case, for example, with all of this technology, radios and everything. I'm talking my husband's side of the thing, but if they buy new ones, I mean, what does it take to sustain that? So really, really great things to think about and things to be aware of in the next, 12 to 24 months. Guys, this has been a great conversation, and I can't thank you both enough, Scott and Nick, for joining me on the Network Effect today. Really great conversations, and thank you so much for having myself and Larry Walsh on your Channel Talks podcast. We were honored to participate, and we'll look forward to hopefully talking with you guys again soon. Scott, Nick, that was a fantastic conversation. I think the big takeaway from this is in a subscription world, visibility isn't optional, it's the foundation of revenue. And platforms like Iasset are helping the channel move from reactive management to proactive growth. To everyone tuning in, thanks so much for joining us. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, share it with your network, and stay tuned for more conversations with leaders that are shaping the future of ecosystem. We'll see you next time on the Network Effect.